Hey guys, tonight we wander into a time when simply waking up could cost you money, yes? Even before coffee. Imagine the chill of damp stone under your feet as you rise with the sun. Rub in the sleep from your eyes, only to hear the clatter of hooves outside. You peer out your thatched window and spot them 3 men in wool cloaks, bearing scrolls, seals, and the kind of tight-lipped expressions that only one profession can manage. Tax collectors. You might not know it yet, but you're already in their sights. Because in the medieval world, just about everything is taxable. Your land, obviously. Your harvest, absolutely. Your chickens, counted. But even stranger, your beard, your windows, your bread, Betchero statusol, subject to the king's delightfully creative forms of revenue. And no, you probably wouldn't survive this era unless you had coins tucked under your mattress, or at least a very good excuse for why you haven't paid up. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere cozy, let me know your city and local time in the comments there, as something soothing about knowing we all drifting off across time zones together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin the day trudging through a narrow, muddy lane as morning mist clings to your tunic. Townsfolk bustle around you with baskets and suspicious glances. It's not the plague this to meet's assessment day. Tax officers are out gathering records, measuring doorways, counting livestock, and scratching notes onto worn parchment. You hear a neighbor mutter something about the new parchment man, and it sounds like a curse. In this sleepy medieval town, taxes are less about logic and more about creative invention. If the treasury's low, the crown will simply invent a tax. Some of these are obvious, like the Heriat, a kind of death duty owed to your feudal lord when a peasant dies. Others, so absurd they make you check twice to see if it's satire, like the Nat tax in certain parts of Italy. Yes, that's real. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or actually enforced, but documents exist suggesting townspeople were once levied for leaving their windows open during Nat season. Why? Because gnats carried disease, and cleaning up after your negligence cost the city. You shrug. Seems about right for the Middle Ages. Past the town square, where the tax collector's desk has been dramatically placed under a dripping canopy. A carved sign reads Royal Levies and Local Obligation. But scrawled beneath in charcoal is something even more unsettling. New editions coming soon. You spot the collector himself, Sir Reginald of Quills, as the town has mockingly dubbed him, puffing on a clay pipe and flipping through scrolls longer than his own cloak. He calls out names, and one by one villagers approach with small bags of coin, wheels of cheese, or occasionally a fat goose. Payment in kind is still common, though the value of a goose fluctuates wildly, depending on the season. You shuffle forward, clutching a small bundle wrapped in cloth, your payment for the grain tie. It's not much, but you hope it's enough. Reginald squints at you over his ledger name. You answer. He checks his scroll. You've got a roof. Yes. You nod. And a back door. Again, nodding. Well then, he sighs, scribbling. Row an extra 2 pence for the second point of egress. You blink. A tax on your back door. Oh, yes, he continues. It's the fire egress levy. Prevents spontaneous combustion. You can't tell if he's joking. Plea. He probably isn't. This kind of absurdity was surprisingly common. Local lords, city councils, and monarchs found new ways to justify fees, especially when funding wars or their own wardrobes. One of the more famous examples is England's scutage, a tax you paid instead of going to war. Rich nobles who didn't fancy the muddy fields of France gladly paid. Poor freemen, not so lucky. As you walk away, your pouch now considerably lighter. You hear laughter from a nearby store. A group of teens are joking about the footpath toll. A short-lived local rule that tried to monetize shortcuts across common land. It failed when locals simply started walking in zigzags to claim they weren't using the path. A merchant passing by mutters, "They'll tax air next." He's only half joking. You head toward the market, weighed down, not just by coins, but by the sheer complexity of medieval tax codes, even tax collectors. It turns out sometimes struggle. Historical records from the 13th century mention entire categories, like miscellaneous royal incumbentia. In one case, a village in Wales accidentally paid double taxes for 4 years, because their clerk copied the wrong name. But the most terrifying part, ignorance isn't an excuse. If you didn't know about a tax, you still owed it. If you couldn't pay, you might be jailed or worse, shamed in public stocks where other villagers could throw turnips and unsolicited tax advice. You spot an old woman beside the well, muttering about how things were simpler under the last monarch. Her cart has a wooden cern that reads exempt too old to bother. You envy her. Still, there's something oddly charming about this world of convoluted charges and sleepy enforcement. Everyone plays the game. Everyone complains. And somehow, life ticks on muddy boots, leaking roofs, and all. You make it home just as the sun begins to fade, slipping past the door before anyone can claim you forgot the lamp. Levia bizarre. Seasonal charge placed on households for lighting streets after dusk, even if the lamp was your own. You sip a weak ale, and sigh. Tomorrow, you'll worry about the next tax. Tonight, you just want to sleep. Pie. You wake to the sound of rustling parchment again. But this time, it's closer just outside your door. The tax collector has returned, and today's mission is facial hair. You glance toward the hand mirror beside your straw-filled mattress. Your beard has grown full over the last few winters, curling with a certain unruly dignity. A mark of manhood, wisdom, perhaps a touch of pride. Unfortunately, It's also now a taxable asset. You step outside and catch sight of Sir Reginald Scribe holding a thin rod and an even thinner sense of humor. Standard beard, Jack, he says. Without making eye contact, he extends the rod. 3 fingers past the chin line subject to royal face hair levy. You chuckle under your breath, unsure if he's serious. He is, you see, in certain parts of medieval Europe, especially under the reign of Peter the Great in Russia, though, is a few centuries off from your current sleepy villagey. The state took facial hair very seriously, while Russia gets the credit for enforcing beard taxes. Most famously, earlier forms of appearance-based levies appeared in various medieval towns. Nobles taxed peasants for long hair, clean tunics, or even the colors of their clothes. Beards, however, became symbolic. Nay, suggested strength, masculinity, taxes. In some cases, a lead seal was given to prove payment. Beard owners were expected to carry it like a strange little facial license, often hanging from a neck cord. No seal, no beard. If caught bearded, without it, a fine, public shaving, or both. Historians still argue whether these beard taxes were strictly enforced. The scribe mumbles, as if narrating his own footnotes aloud. Or if they were mostly symbolic acts of control and uniformity. Still, you comply. You reach into your tunic pocket and hand over small silver coin, the kind that clinks louder than you do, like when handed over. The scribe nods, scribbles something on his scroll, and sticks a waxy token onto your front door. You're now an official beard-bearer, he says, deadpan. Behind you, your cousin peeks out of his cottage, clean-shaven and smug. Saved a coin by trimming, he whispers. You notice his chin is already cold and pink. You walk to the village square, where gossip is even more plentiful than grain. The blacksmith complains loudly about how his beard has soot in it, and therefore should be tax-exempt. Passing monk mutters something about vanity being its own punishment. And someone in the back chimes in. Next, they'll tax eyebrows. It's not impossible. You stop by a small stall where a street performer is mimicking the local tax officer by wearing a beard made entirely of moss. The crowd laughs gently, no jeers. Just the kind of sleepy satire only a deeply taxed society can appreciate. Bow. The performer takes a bow and gestures toward his collection bowl. All donations exempt from the beard levy. I assure you. You drop in a copper, and he offers a low wink. Later that afternoon, you visit the local barber who's doing brisk business, for one. A sign outside reads prevention, overpayment, clean shaves, 1 penny. He's practically a revolutionary, undercutting the entire tax scheme one razor at a time. As you sit nearby, a traveling merchant leans in and tells you a curious tale from the East. In some Islamic courts, P claims scholars and jurists were required to wear long beards, while others were forbidden from doing so. Entire legal arguments unfolded over beard style. You're not sure whether to be impressed or exhausted. Your mind drifts to stranger scenarios. What if someone grew half a beard? Would they be charged half a tax? What about goats? Surely their beards weren't taxable, or were they? No one really knows. Not even Sir Reginald. And that's part of the charm and chaos of medieval taxation. No system was too sacred to tamper with. If it could be grown, counted, seen, or even guessed it could be taxed. As dusk rolls in your face, itches beneath your proud facial mane. You glance at your front door and see the wax seal gently catching the evening. It's ridiculous. It's invasive. It's oddly poetic. You sigh, rub your chin, and murmur to yourself, at least they haven't started taxing sneezes. A sudden breeze tickles your nose. Better not give them ideas. You sit by the window the next morning, watching as clouds drift lazily across a grayish blue sky. The fire in your hearth crackles gently, and you're just beginning to think that today might be calm/quiet, tax-free. That's when the town crier walks by, shouting something unintelligible, but you definitely catch the word air. You lean out of your window and shout, "What now?" The crier turns to you, slightly winded. New levy from the council. They say all public breathing must be registered. You stare at him, you mean? An air tax? He nods. Technically a shared environment usage tariff. You close the windows slowly and rest your forehead against the cold glass. It's hard to believe, but taxes on the very air you breathe, or more accurately, taxes related to clean air and public health have more history than you'd expect. While there's no confirmed medieval policy titled air tax, you begin to recall the bizarre efforts of local lords to monetize nearly every element of daily life. Back in the 13th century, for instance, English townships experimented with something that modern scholars refer to as an environmental sanitation levy. It wasn't a tax on breathing per se, but rather a charge issued to households located too close to waste, slaughterhouses, or ironically, bad air. If your home was considered to contribute to public stench or disease, you were fined. Historians still argue whether this was truly about health, or simply a way for landowners to muscle out poorer neighbors. You leave your home cautiously and head into town. The air, for now, remains free to inhale. The rumor mill has already spun into high gear. A merchant jokes that he's holding his breath to avoid fees. A baker suggests charging for scent diffusion. His pastries are rather intoxicating. After all, as you pass the central well, you hear another strange term, miasma rights. Apparently, a nearby village claims exclusive spiritual ownership over the cleansing winds from the northern hills. They've begun taxing travelers who pause to breathe deeply. You find a bench and sit half laughing at the absurdity. Then someone behind you says, "You think that's bad?" In Bruges, they're taxing chimney smoke. Now, too much fog, too much sharing. Your eyes widen. Heard rumors of that some towns imposed chimney levies based on the number of fireplaces in a home. More chimneys meant more smoke, and more smoke meant more trouble, and more tax. This leads to a peculiar trend where wealthier citizens conceal chimneys, combine them, or, in one extreme case, share a single massive central fireplace with their neighbor via a connected flue, not for comfort, for taxes. You wonder briefly if this is why the mayor's house smells like everyone's dinner. You stroll past a group of children chasing each other with red whistles. One blows a particularly loud note and is immediately scolded by a woman nearby. "Don't waste the good air," she mutters, as if this is an actual rule. It's becoming clear now. The absurdity is blee. The moment something is labeled a resource-aire, sound lighted becomes taxable. The logic is both paper-thin and oddly brilliant. Just then you spot the town notary, posting a fresh scroll on the notice board. Curious, you wander over. It reads, "Notice, beginning next, moon, all horn blowers, bell ringers, street performers, and loud singers must register their air-based practices with the Royal Acoustics Office." You read it again. The Royal Acoustics Office. That didn't exist yesterday. The man beside you, who smells faintly of onions and bureaucracy, leans in and says, "It's for public harmony." You see, one man's chant is another man's racket. You raise an eyebrow. "You're with the council, aren't you?" He smiles proudly. Deputy assistant to the Sound Environment Committee. You decide not to press further. That night, as you light a candle and climb into bed, you reflect on the strange turns your village has taken. The sky remains unmarked by chimneys, the wind unclaimed by bureaucrats, at least for now. But the scrolls keep growing longer. Still, you find it hard to resent it entirely. The weirdness of it all has become oddly comforting, predictable. Even wake up, pay for something ridiculous, chuckle about it, go to sleep. You blow out the candle and whisper to no one in particular. Maybe tomorrow they'll tax yawns. And honestly, you wouldn't even be surprised. You awaken this morning with a strange, sinking feeling. Something about the air seems too quiet. Then no birds, no street, no flirting back. You step outside, and the mystery exists. The bachelors of the sun, stacked in a small expression. Each of them is wearing a dull You approach one of them, Thomas. Cobblers sooner whisper. "Did someone die?" He scoffs. "Worse. They've passed the bachelor's levy." It turns out that unmarried men over a certain age must now pay a yearly fine for the luxury of their freedom, according to town gossip. This initiative came directly from the council after a series of complaints from concerned mothers and one very persuasive priest. You struggled to believe it, but the records back it up. In medieval France and England, bachelors were indeed penalized by local taxes or community pressure. The logic They weren't contributing to population growth, to moral order, or to the economy, the way married couples did. It didn't help that many of them were perceived as loafers, squandering their youth in taverns, and singing too many lute ballads. Historians still argue whether these taxes were meant as serious deterrents, or merely symbolic nudges to encourage marriage. Thomas says with a sigh, as though he's been reading historical footnotes all morning. You ask him what the punishment is for not paying. Public matchmaking, he mutters grimly. They pair you with someone's aunt until you surrender. You wince. That's aggressive. Later in the day, you attend the town's market, where a booth has already sprung up labeled eligible and taxable. A spinster with sharp eyes and even sharper elbows points at the bachelors, like they re-plump apples. One of them tries to hide behind a bread cart. Meanwhile, two married men nearby are boasting about their new civic unity discount. A modest tax reduction awarded to those with wives and at least 2 children. They nudge each other with exaggerated pride, while their children throw turnips at a fence. Of course, this strange tax idea wasn't limited to Europe. In Imperial China, records show that the ding taxa, kind of adult, male, head taxa, was sometimes applied more heavily to single men. These taxes weren't just fiscal. Bitch fee. Marriage meant stability. Batch fees. Batch fees were unpredictable. You pass the church and notice a new wooden sign. Outside, matchmaking services now offered. Confessions half price for couples. You nearly laugh out loud. You can't tell whether the clergy are desperate for unity or just clever with their budgeting. Buy it, then, as if summoned by your skepticism. Sir Reginald appears in the courtyard holding a clipboard. Any eligible bachelors here? Be called. The crowd scatters faster than rats from a falling cart. Pew! You grab a nearby sack of flour and pretend to be a merchant. It works. For now. You sit on a crate and watch the slow comedy unfold. Young men ducking behind goats. Grandmothers waving marriage certificates like passports. A bard hastily scribbling love poems in case he's asked for romantic potential. It's all so ridiculous, yet weirdly effective. By sunset, 2 engagements have already been announced, one of which seems mostly strategic. Bash as the sun sets behind the bell tower. You hear one bachelor grumble. They're going to start taxing flirting next. Someone else mutters, only if you're bad at it. Still, the idea of being taxed for your romantic status stays with you. Imagine explaining that to someone from the future. Why didn't you marry? Oh, I couldn't afford the taxes. As you make your way home under a navy blue sky, you pass a small tavern. Inside, a group of bachelors have started a new club called the Untied Knot. You hear laughter, tankards clinking, and one voice shouting to freedom. For a fee, you can't help but smile. You reach your door, glance at your reflection in the window, and consider the costs of companionship taxed or not. For now, you're just grateful. Your beard still qualifies for the loyalty discount. You wake the next morning to a different sort of commotion church. Bells ringing, not in mourning or celebration, but in a strange, stuttering rhythm that suggests either divine confusion or a particularly grumpy bell. Pull in on your cloak. You head toward the chapel. As you approach, you notice something new carved into the side of the church's wooden entry post. A short phrase in Latin you can barely translate. Beneath it, a fresh parchment nailed with a wax seal. It reads, "All parishioners with assigned seating must submit pew fees by first light Sunday." You blink. Pew fees. Are they really charging for where you sit now? Turns out, yes. And it's not even that strange. In medieval parishes across Europe particularly. In wealthier English towns and cities it was common for families to purchase or rent specific pews in church. The best ones close to the front, near the altar, and far from drafty doorways were reserved for the rich. The poor, as always, stood in the back, if they even fit inside. Today, your sleepy town has decided to formalize this arrangement with an annual pew levy. Not just for the seat, mind you, for the status of the seat. Few shuffle into the chapel alongside the others, where a bored-looking cleric is jotting names into a leather-bound ledger. As you approach, he asks, seated or standing. You're unsure how to respond. Pei clarifies, "Do you wish to register a pew, or shall we assume?" Casual standing. Attendance. Casual. You repeat. Non-committal, he says. Spiritually wobbly. Tier 3. You opt for standing 4 now. He makes a show of writing Tier 3. Likely sinner beside a name. You turn around and spot Lady Hensley, widow and known gossip, smirking from her corner pew, already decked out in embroidered cushions. Blood. A plaque has been nailed above her spot. Hensley family. Eternal loyalty since 1282. You're not sure anyone checked that date. As the service begins, the priest offers a sermon on humility. Burn. Then reminds the congregation to settle their pew taxes before next moon, or risk being relocated to the damp rear corner behind the column. You glanced at the damp rear corner. It has most possibly a mushroom. Later that day, you pass the tax office and spot a man arguing about his seat. Apparently, he had a pew, but now he's lost it to someone who offered a better price. He protests that he prayed harder, but it's no use. In this case, faith loses to finance. Historians still argue whether these pew rents were ecclesiastical necessity or creeping capitalism. A local scribe mutters nearby, but most agree they reflected social standing as much as piety. In other words, God might love everyone equally, but the front row still costs extra. You stop by the tavern, where the topic of the day has shifted from beards and bachelors to blessed benches. One farmer claims he is going to build his own portable pew and wheel it in. Another jokes about offering sponsorship space on the sides of his seat, funded by McGregor's Oats. And just when you think it can't get sillier, someone mentions the penance tariff. Apparently, those seeking confession more than 3 times a month are now subject to an overuse charge. The reasoning, excessive sinning places undue strain on the clergy's listening capacity. One particularly cheeky merchant boasts that he now commits only medium sins to keep things affordable. You sip from your mug and think about how even your most private actions where you sit, what you whisper to a priest, are now caught in this web of taxation. There's something oddly reassuring in how comprehensive it all is. If everything is taxed, maybe nothing truly is sacred. You walk home as bells ring again in the distance. The rhythm, now commonest-like alarm, more like a lullaby. You imagined someone at the altar counting coins into a wooden box marked reserved for divine seating. Pause just outside your door, glance up at the stars, and whisper, "I hope heaven doesn't charge rent." Then you chuckle, because, let's be honest, it probably does. You're jolted awake by a sharp tapping on your shutters. A neighbor's voice follows. They're measuring windows today. Best hide the ladder. You blink, groggy. Windows. What could possibly be wrong with windows? Then it clicks. Window taxes. You've heard whispers of them, mostly from the merchant caravans that pass through town. You always assumed it was some urban myth, like but now, as you swing open your shutters and see a man with a wooden measuring rod marking the height and width of your window, it's hard to deny. You step outside and catch up to the inspector, who gives you a bored nod. "New decree," he mutters. "Anything above 5 square hands is taxable. Decorative panes count double. Toe." You glance back at your humble windows. Nothing decorative about them unless cobwebs now count as trim. It's absurd, and yet historically rooted. The Wint tax, most famously enforced in Britain from the late 17th century onward, had its roots in earlier medieval levies based on displayed wealth. Large windows were a luxury, letting in light a privilege. Therefore, light became taxable. But in your sleepy town, things go further. They're not just taxing window stare, inspecting ladders. You trail the inspector down the lane as he eyes buildings suspiciously. A ladder leaning against a stable is noted in his scroll. A thatcher's kit of tools gets a sideways glance. You ask what the ladder's got to do with anything. "Well," he says, chewing a straw, "a ladder could mean hidden rooftop windows, or upper floors. Either way taxed air and light usage. Historians still argue whether these inspections were truly about revenue or simply surveillance in disguise. He adds in a tone that suggests he reads way too many old scrolls. You reach the carpenter's workshop just as a dispute breaks out. "I only use my ladder for repairs," the carpenter shouts. "Then why is it tall enough to reach a steeple?" Bit inspector counters. "Because I build steeples too." The crowd mutters approvingly. The whole affair is starting to feel more like street theater than governance. A few children nearby are playing tax collector, one of them marching dramatically with a stick and a scroll. Another pretends to be a house, standing still and yelling. "I only have 2 windows." You shake your head, half amused, half alarmed. Walk in home. You notice a fresh scroll nailed to your neighbor's barn. Notice a window cut. 6 confirmed, 2 ready, 3 pence, and 1 measure barley. Apparently, they've introduced partial payments now. If you can't afford coin, you can settle your tax in grain, dried fruit, or strangely candle stubs. By mid-afternoon, an entrepreneurial soul has opened a booth called Window Covers. Your privacy, their problem. For a modest fee, he'll nail opaque wooden shutters over your windows. Technically, the logic goes, if the window is blocked, it's not usable and maybe not taxable. You can already hear Sir Reginald grumbling about loophole abusers. The townsfolk, ever creative, begin discussing alternatives. Underground home, shared walls, a rotating skylight that only opens on alternate days. One man, slightly drunk, suggests just painting windows on the outside of the house. Looks rich, pays nothing. You laugh, but not too loudly. That might be taxed next. Even the local church is getting involved. A sermon this week warns against prideful glass, implying that too many windows may tempt divine judgment, or at least the judgment of Sir Reginald. As the sun dips low and the village takes on that golden glow, you sit in your small wooden chair and glance around your cottage. You count 1, 2, 3 windows, modest, safe. Probably not enough to raise eyebrows. Still, just in case, you pull the curtain across and blow out the lamp. Let them tax the light. Tonight, you'll keep your glow to yourself. The scent of fresh bread floats through the morning air, crusty, laced with the faintest hint of ash from last night's fire. It leads you, like a cartoon character, on a breeze toward the village bakery. But something's off. There's a small line out front there for this hour, and every loaf leaving the counter is stamped with something. A seal. You squint. The royal loaf. You blink again. Now, fully awake. This is new. Inside the bakery, the usually jolly Baker Thomas, with the arms like barrels and the smile like sunshine, is muttering curses under his breath. You peek over the counter just in time to see him pressing a wooden stamp into a still warm loaf of rye. You raise an eyebrow. Please size. Bread inspectors. Of course. Turns out, your sleepy village has just reinstituted an old tax tradition. The assize of bread and ale. This medieval regulation, which truly did exist, particularly in England, wasn't just about taxation. It was about control. Authorities regulated not only the price of bread, but its weight, ingredients, and yes-approval stamps. They say it's for fairness, Thomas says, handing you a still-steaming bun. But mostly, it's for coin. Sure enough, you spot a thin man in town, livery hovering in the back of the shop, scale in hand. He lifts each loaf, eyes it critically, and notes its weight. Too light fine, too heavy, double tax, too delicious, probably suspicious. Historians still argue whether the assize was more About quality control or maintaining grain monopoly. The inspector murmurs, almost to himself, like he's narrating an internal monologue. You look closer. The stamp on the bread is actually the town seal. A goat holding a sheaf of wheat. Symbolic, vaguely confusing, deeply bureaucratic. Outside you find the tavern owner, pacing anxiously. Peas next. They're coming for the brewers, he mutters. And I've been flexible with the hops. Turns out the ale taster is also back in tannery position in many medieval communities, often elected locally. Their job, sample every batch of ale to ensure it wasn't too weak, too strong, or too dangerously experimental. Imagine being fined because your drink's too good. The innkeeper groans. Still, some welcome the change. Town elders claim it'll reduce alcoholic dishonesty and prevent what they call drunken taxation evasion. You resist the urge to ask what that means. You've learned by now that if a medieval tax sounds absurd, it probably happened. Around midday, you pass the town square where a small stage has been set up. A man in a flower-covered smock is making a public apology for using hazelnut flour instead of barley. His punishment: a 1-week ban from selling and a very dry boot-only diet. Meanwhile, black market bread is already popping up inside alleys. Loaves with no stamps, sold warm and whisperingly soft. They cost a little more, but lack the bitter aftertaste of regulation. You sample one and raise your eyebrows. No stamp, no seal, just flavor. Later, a traveling monk tells you about a distant town in northern Italy where bakers once protested the bread taxes by only selling soup. Same ingredients, different name, he says, with a wink. You laugh, nearly spitting out your crust. Brilliant. Back in your cottage, you sit with your loaf, your mug, and an arising sense that even the basics, food, drink, era, all just government side quests now. But there's also something kind of sweet about it. The whole town now cares about the weight of bread, the bitter temps of ale, the pomp of a pastry scene. Even food becomes a shared ritual, however ridiculous the rules. You lean back, tearing off a corner of your stamped rye, and whisper to yourself, stamped or not, still delicious. Then you green root and chew slowly. Your dreams are interrupted by a strange rhythmic oinking. You sit up groggily. That's not just a pigot's, several pigots, and they're not lost. They're marching, or rather, being marched. You rub your eyes and step outside to find your neighbor, Walter the pig farmer, guiding half a dozen squealing pigs toward the village square. Behind him, Marshov, Courser Reginald, and 2 assistants, one of whom is carrying a clipboard that appears to be made entirely from stacked pig ears, painted in ink. Hopefully, Walter looks miserable. They're doing a swine census. He grumbled. You blink. You're being taxed by pig. He nods. It's the porcine ownership declaration. You have to count them, weigh them, name them if you want to keep more than 4. Sure enough, a long wooden sign has been posted at the square's edge. Hogs kept in excess shall be levied at a rate of 1 groat per snout. You stare at it. Per snout. This is not some fever dream, it's a throwback to real medieval practices. Livestock was a central part of wealth, and keeping pigs, especially, was both essential and taxable. In many rural areas, taxes were calculated based on how many pigs you owned, how often they were grazed on public lands, and even which forests they rooted in. Historians still argue whether this was about population control or forest preservation. Someone mutters behind you. You don't even turn around anymore. There's always a historian lurking when the taxes get weird. Sir Reginald stops at each sty, counts pigs, scribbles notes, then lifts a small wooden stick and taps the animals as if blessing or cursing them. Walter sighs again. 3 of mine are old. 1 bites, but they still count. You ask him why. Naming helps. Well, he shrugs. Named, pigs are seen as companions. Companions get a slight discount, but only if you can prove emotional attachment. You blink. How do you prove that? Walter lifts a hand and shouts, "This one's Mildred. She sleeps beside me." The pig squeals. Sir Reginald doesn't look convinced. Elsewhere, another farmer has taken a different approach. He's painted numbers on his pigs. Efficiency, he explains. Number 4's taxable. Number 5's emotional support. You don't ask questions. You stop by the baker's stall, still warm with the scent of cinnamon and bureaucracy. He tells you that some regions once taxed pigs based on their foraging range. If your pig wandered into the woods, you paid a routing fee. If they stayed on your land, no charge. Sort of a pig-based zoning law. You wonder if there's a tax for pigs that wander between both. Later, the village priest is seen trying to convince a tax clerk that the monastery-s pigs are blessed beasts, and therefore exempt. The clerk disagrees unless the pigs also take vows of poverty. The priest doesn't laugh. Meanwhile, children have taken to naming every pig in sight. You spot a group arguing over whether Lady Trotter is distinct from Sir Squealbird. It's chaos. Slow, muddy chaos. You pause to watch as the final tally is announced. Walter surprisingly owes less than expected. 1 pig, apparently, has mystical characteristics due to an oddly shaped birthmark, and qualifies for a religious waiver. Blah. You don't ask for clarification. As the sun begins to set, the pigs are herded back, home mud-slicked, grunting. Some now branded with chalk symbols to indicate taxation status. Bolter gives one a tired pat on the head and mutters, "You cost more than you're worth, Mildred." Still, there's an odd sense of unity in it all. The whole town gathered to count pigs, argue classifications, invent names, and test the boundaries of logic. It shouldn't work, but somehow it does. You return home with your shoes heavy with mud, your mind spinning with pig-related legislation, and your heart oddly full. Tonight, at least, you're grateful you raise only turnips. You rise before dawn, greeted by the rhythmic slosh of water and the faint scent of boiled linen wafting through the air. It's laundry day in the village, and for once you think maybe, just maybe this will be a quiet morning. Then you see them. 3 women with armfuls of wet clothing, trudging toward the river, flanked by 2 tax officials with clipboards. You exhale slowly. Not even the washers are safe. At the riverbank, things have already grown tense. The officials, dressed in matching gray cloaks and equally gray expressions, are inspecting baskets. You've exceeded the allowable quantity of soap per wash day. One says blandly to a washerwoman named Agnes, who immediately protests. It's my husband's tunic. She says he sweats like a mule in battle. Apparently, that doesn't matter. Soap use is taxable now, and so is public laundering. It's all part of the new domestic production and service regulation fee. Translation: if you perform household tasks, for others even casually, you're a business, and businesses, as everyone knows, get taxed. You sit on a rock nearby and watch the whole soggy affair unfold. A mother of 4 argues that she's washing her children's clothes, not her neighbor's. But her neighbor points out that she's used her soap, and thus qualifies as a contributing party to a taxable service. It's like watching a legal drama, except everyone's wet, and someone keeps stepping on a frog. Across the river, another woman begins drying garments on a line, only to be reprimanded for using communal drying space without levee clearance. You look up at the sky, half expecting a scroll to drop from the clouds. Reading, air drying, subject to breeze tariffs. You wander toward the village square, where you overhear more grumbles from wives, daughters, and even a few resentful husbands about the evolving rules around domestic labor. You'd think only those offering services for higher professional washerwomen, seamstresses, cooks would be taxed. But no. Even unpaid labor is being classified and logged. Historians still argue whether this was a sincere attempt to value women's work. Murmurs a scholar seated under a fig tree, or simply the crown, realizing there was more money in soap than swords. One man, cheeks flushed with indignation, insists his wife's washing efforts are purely recreational and therefore untaxable. She promptly dumps a wet tunic on his head. In the afternoon, Sir Reginald announces a new set of enforcement measures from atop a wooden crate. Effective immediately. He drones. All laundering beyond 1 stone weight per household per week shall be taxed at a rate of 1 farthing per 5 garments. Households with more than 3 children may apply for hardship exemption, pending individual suck cap. You rub your temples. A midwife beside you whispers. Next they'll be taxing the act of folding. You're not sure if she's joking. The oddest part, it's not just washerwomen being watched. Midwives, cooks, and herbalists are all under new scrutiny. Any woman known for communal skills is quietly being labeled an unregistered labor provider. You recall old folk tales about witches being persecuted for strange brews and healing bombs. Could this be the bureaucratic cousin of that same fear? If someone helps others especially without charging, they're seen as destabilizing the formal economy. So, what's the solution? Apparently, a guild. The town's washerwomen gather in the tavern that night, damp and begin drafting rules for a formal washerwomen's collective. Bell resources, standardized soap measurements, and most importantly, try to negotiate a flat tax with Sir Reginald in exchange for autonomy. Be listened from a nearby table, sipping weak ale and trying not to laugh. The idea of an underground soap cartel is both ridiculous and inspiring. That night, you pass by the river once more. The garments are gone, the breeze is cool, and all is still. In the distance, a soft hum, someone singing as they fold laundry under candlelight. No, you smile and whisper to yourself. They may tax the water, but they'll never tax the song. Then again, best not give them ideas. Pew waked the briny temps of sea air, drifting unusually far inland. It is not often that scent makes it to your part of the village, unless someone is overboiled a cod. You sit up, stretch, and peer out the window. What you see next is unexpected. A wagon rolls past, heaped with seaweed. Not food, not firewood, just a massive, slimy green mountain of marine plant life. You step outside and call after the driver. "Where's all that going?" he shouts, over his shoulder, to the way station. "New tax on gathered shore goods. Seaweeds, now premium." You blink. You knew fish markets could be competitive, but seaweed. As you wander toward the coastline, the village begins to stir with a peculiar energy. Half the town is headed the same direction. Apparently, word has spread anyone. Collecting natural resources from the shore must now pay the tidal harvest levy. That includes seaweed, driftwood, salt crystals, and even the occasional lucky shell. Historians still argue whether medieval seaweed taxes were standardized or just coastal improvisation. Says a traveling salt merchant beside you. But some lords definitely tried. Especially when fuel supplies ran low. You hadn't realized seaweed was so versatile. Turns out it's used for everything from livestock feed to roofing insulation, and even as a fertilizer for fields. That last one is the real issue. It turns free shoreline gunk into a valuable agricultural tool. Valuable means taxable. Down at the beach, chaos is unfolding at a relaxed, wave-splashed pace. Farmers with baskets are being weighed in, questioned, and sometimes scolded for taking royally claimed fronds. One woman is being fined for collecting excessively decorative shells. No one quite knows what that means. Nearby, a cleric is arguing with an officer over whether seaweed gathered during a baptismal rite counts as holy salvage or taxable cargo. The clerk suggests splitting the difference. They settle on a one-shell tie. A fisherman by the pier explains that in parts of medieval Ireland and Scotland, rights to collect seaweed were passed down within families and even written into land leases. Some beaches had strict timing rules. You could only gather during low tide on the third morning after the full moon. Break that rule. Pay doubly. You're not pretending you'll remember that. You won't. Over at a makeshift stand, a tax official offers an illustrated scroll showing acceptable harvest amounts. It's filled with helpful drawings. A peasant holding one bundle equals approve. A peasant juggling bundles equals greedy and suspect. A boy beside you mutters, "Next, they'll charge us for looking at the sea." "Only if you stare too long," his sister replies. Back in the village, the tavern's menu has shifted to reflect the new economics. Seaweed stew is now a premium item. Dried kelp garnish, extra 2 pence. Even the soap smells slightly more oceanic. And the bathhouse, introducing the salt soak surcharge. Pass by Walter the Pig Famahi's latest venture involves feeding dried seaweed to his pigs and claiming it makes the bacon brinnier. Whether that's true or not, the town's already gossiping about his new boutique pork. Bad sunset. You walk the beach once more, your toes sinking into damp sand. A child builds a sand castle and asks her father if the castle will be taxed too. "Only if the king wants beachfront property," he says, tousling her hair. Blue, you look to the waves, the tide, rolling in with calm certainty. So much of life is like this. You gather, they count. You try to live simply, and somehow simplicity becomes expensive. Still, there's something oddly peaceful about it all. The rhythm of tides, the rustle of dried kelp. Even the clipboard-wielding clocks move slower out here, lulled by the surf. You pick up a small shell nothing. Decorative and tuck it into your pocket. You'll declare it tomorrow. Maybe. You wake this morning with a dry mouth and a craving for something simple, warm broth. Maybe, or a crust of bread dipped in salt. You reach for the little ceramic jar on your shelf and tap out a few white crystals. That's when you notice the red wax seal on the lid. Suddenly, it hits you. They've taxed your salt. Out in the square, the usual murmurs have turned into full-on grumbling. A young merchant is waving a scroll in the air, shouting about the salt register and how even the flavor of life now belongs to the ledger. You make your way to the gathering crowd. A new table has been erected, a simple affair with a weighed scale and several small clay bowls. Behind it stands a local scribe who looks both smug and exhausted. Above him, a sign reads Selenum Taxitam. All personal salt holdings must be declared. You lean toward a woman in line who's holding a jar like yours. "Since when do we declare our salt?" she sighs. "Since yesterday. Royal decree. Bits for coastal stabilization and trade parity. Boo-boo." Which is a fancy way of saying someone up the ladder realized salt equals money. And it's true. In much of the medieval world, salt wasn't just seasoning, it was vital. It preserved meat, fish, even vegetables. Without it, winter survival was grim. The word salaria itself even stems from salarium, a Roman allowance given for purchasing salt. So yes, this new salt tax isn't just annoying. It's personal. Historians still argue whether salt taxes strengthened empires or sparked rebellion. Murmurs a dusty traveler behind you. Some say salt levies were the first step toward full-scale revolts. You've heard the stories. France, India, even in China, emperors built entire bureaucracies around the trade and taxation of salt. Salt inspectors were famously well paid and famously corrupt. Back in your own small village, the bureaucracy is just getting started. The clerk now weighs each household's salt jar. If it's over the allowed weight, if it's under suspicion, how do you live with so little salt? Some try clever tricks. One woman dilutes hers with crushed eggshells. Another pretends to confuse sugar with salt. The inspector tastes it and gags. Meanwhile, a black market store has already popped up behind the stables, advertising unseen salt, no questions asked. It's 3 times the price and comes in a folded scrap of linen. You step closer to the official table, where an elderly man is arguing that his salt was gifted by angels during a dream. The scribe considers this briefly before taxing it anyway. You try to stay quiet. Come, you're just here to register. But even that feels invasive-like. Your spice rack's been put on trial. Eventually, the village priest arrives. His jar is larger than anyone's. He explains, it's for communal meals. And surely the church should be exempt. Sir Reginald appears, summoned as usual when things escalate. Pyre reads through a scroll with exaggerated patience and declares, communal salt shall be taxed at 2/3 the standard rate to reflect its holy application. The priest is not pleased. As you finally hand over your jar, the scribe nods approvingly. You've got restraint, he says, weighing it. Hardly enough to flavor a radish. You smile politely. You don't tell him about the second jar hidden under your floorboards. By evening, the entire village smells vaguely of boiling brine. Some are making soups, others pickling vegetables or fish in bulk. Better to use the salt now than risk future increases. You walk home under the fading sun, passing the old salt road carved between the fields once used for trade. At home, you light a candle and open your modest pantry. The taxed jar sits on the shelf, sealed and smug. You lift the floorboard and retrieve the second jar. A little rebellion, a little spice. You sprinkle a pinch over your stew and whisper, they can tax it, but they can't taste it. Then you smile. Just a little. You wake to sunlight streaming in through your now thoroughly taxed window. A rooster crows, a door slams, and from somewhere outside, count those panes. Again. That one's definitely You stretch, rise, and mentally prepare for yet another day of strange bureaucratic rituals. But today's whispering isn't about bread, salt, or pigs. Today, it's about windows and wall. You step outside and spot a small crowd gathering at the town hall. A new scroll is being nailed into place. As you approach, the headline leaps out at you. Window Inventory Decree. Royal Contribution Scheme for National Defense. You blink. National Defense. Sir Reginald, looking far too pleased with himself or someone up before second breakfast, steps forward and reads aloud, by order of the Crown. All private residences with more than 6 windows shall contribute a levy to fund regional defense operations. Greater access to light denotes greater wealth, and greater wealth demands greater responsibility. You whisper to the man next to you, they're taxing windows. For war, he shrugs. They say soldiers need boots, and my parlor has a lovely eastern view. As absurd as it sounds, this isn't unprecedented. In 17th and 18th century, Britain and arguably earlier, in various forms, window taxes became a popular proxy for wealth. Counting windows was easier than assessing income. More windows meant more money. More money meant more tax. And in times of conflict, that money went straight to funding wars. Historians still argue whether these taxes discouraged architectural creativity or encouraged strategic home darkness. Mumbles the town's architect, sketching what appears to be a house with exactly 6.5 windows. You chuckle, creative accounting, it's creative carpentry. By mid-morning, a small battalion of clerks' fans, out across the village, scrolls in hand, begin marking homes. 1 chalk line per window. 2, if it's made of glass. 3, if it opens too generously. At the edge of the square, a pair of elderly sisters argue that their back-facing windows only open onto the goat pen and therefore do not count as luxury. Sir Reginald, flipping through a truly excessive number of parchment addendums, responds, goats deserve light too. You meander toward the tavern, where the local brewer is already for windows deep into a spirited debate. He offers to brick up 2 of his windows if it'll reduce his bill. I'll just drink by candlelight, he grumbles. The blacksmith, meanwhile, is planning to swap his back wall for stained glass. 1 window, but very expressive. There's talk of forming a window-limited builders guild. You overhear suggestions of collapsible shutters, camouflaged panes, and 1 truly awful idea involving rotating wall segment. The creativity is flowing faster than the ale. By afternoon, things have grown heated. A Mercer manor on the hill tall wide, practically made of windowsies, now surrounded by villagers chanting 12 panes. 12 panes. The merchant responds by hosting a feast with curtains drawn. The priest weighs in during evening prayers, proffering this gem. Blessed are the modest in light, for they shall not bankroll the battlefield. No one laughs, but everyone tires. As you walk home, the sunset hits your cottage, just right lit, flooding in through your modest 5-window setup. You pause, soaking in the warmth, wondering if you should just board one up, be safe. Then again, there's something beautiful about that 6th window. It's not wealth, it's not excess. It's just the perfect place to watch the stars appear. You pour a cup of cider, sit near the window, and think about all the strange ways war has trickled into daily life. Through spices, through salt, through sunlight. And as the first stars appear, you whisper, if they tax the moonlight next, I'm moving to the woods. Boo. You're stirred from your sleep by a sharp clatter. Outside, something metallic, hollow, and distinctly monkish. You throw on your cloak and step outside, just in time to see a group of hooded figures sneaking past your garden gate with a wagon full of wine barrels. One trips, a barrel wobbles, and the sound echoes through the still morning air. You raise an eyebrow, monks, smuggling. A voice replies from the dark, not smuggling. Relocating assets before assessment. Ah, that old chestnut. Pull you follow them, out of curiosity more than civic duty, and end up at the edge of the abbey, where things have taken a turn. The local tax clerks, led by the ever-watchful Sir Reginald, have arrived, with new orders from the Crown. It appears the once sacred tax exemption for religious institutions has been reconsidered. Read the scroll posted on the Abbey gate reads, Royal Audit of Ecclesiastical Holdings. Contributions now required for all abbey, priories and sanctified landowners. The monks are not thrilled. You hear one muttering. First our tithes went to the poor. Now they go to the army's sock fund. Another one sighs. Let them try to inventory our wine. We hide it by the gallon in the hymnals. This isn't just petty grumbling. In medieval Europe, religious institutions held vast land and wealth. Monasteries were not just spiritual sanctuaries, they were economic hubs, landlords, brewers, even moneylenders. 4 centuries. They enjoyed tax immunity, often justified by their services to the poor and their eternal praying for everyone else's sins. But when monarchs got strapped for cash, especially during wartime, these holy havens became irresistible targets. Historians still argue whether taxing monasteries was economic necessity or political overreach, says a passing novice, who is also carrying a suspiciously heavy sack labeled Dante open. Definitely just bread. You watch as the auditors begin their work, moving slowly through cloisters and cellars, counting loaves, bottles, even robes. One monk tries to argue that their cheese wheels are part of a miraculous fermentation process and should be exempt. The clerk shrugs and taxes them anyway. Meanwhile, the townspeople gather outside the abbey walls, half in amusement, half in awe. It's not every day you see a monk bribe a scribe with honey cake. Back in the village, the priest is pacing nervously. He's heard whispers of similar audits coming to parish churches. If they tax the relics, he mutters, I swear, I'll tell them St. Cuthbert Esto was just a chicken, but you nod solemnly. Sometimes faith must be flexible. As afternoon stretches into evening, more tailies emerge. A monastery in the next shire has allegedly constructed hidden rooms full of unregistered wine, rare manuscripts, and a particularly fat pig named Gregory. The auditors haven't found it yet. You start to see a pattern. The more the state taxes, the more creativity blooms in return. Be monks, once aloof and abstracted from town life, now huddle in taverns, negotiating trade deals under candlelight. We'll pray for your harvest. If you don't report our cider press, one offered. It's a strange kind of harmony. That night, you find yourself at the abbey wall again. A young monk hands you a sealed jug and whispers, for your silence and your supper be blessings, blessings, blessings upon your loopholes. You whisper back, pilgrims. We've been tax dodging since before the Psalms. Back in your cottage, you pour a little of the jug's contents. It's sharp, rich, and full of quiet defiance. And as you sip, you think, if even the holy can't escape the taxman, maybe no one can. But perhaps, just perhaps, cleverness will always outpace the scroll. The next morning greets you not with birdsong, but with the sound of showering, rhythmic, rising and falling, like a chant. You slip on your boots, open your door, and nearly step into a mob. They're not angry at you. Not yet. But the center of town is swelling with people. Farmers, gripping pitchforks, merchants, clutching ledgers, even children holding hastily painted wooden signs that read things like bread, not bureaucracy. And we pay. We pout. The tax revolt has begun. You shuffle into the crowd and overhear bits of conversation. They taxed our candles, then our curtains, and now they want a fee for every pot I stir. I can tell you how to enthusiastic a laugh during service. And the pig's name wasn't even Mildred. It was symbolic. In the center of the square stands a cart converted into a makeshift podium. Butcher from the next village is rallying the crowd with surprising eloquence. We pay for our windows. We pay for our bread. But we shall not pay for the act of existing. Applause. Stomping. One goat bleats in solidarity. You spot Sir Reginald and his entourage trying to pretend they're not sweating. But the usual smug curl of his lip is missing. He holds a scroll with trembling fingers. A man beside you whispers, "That's the collector's book." He's afraid someone will burn it. You glance toward the bakery. A loaf sits in the window. It bears no seal. A deliberate act of defiance. Moments later, someone yells unstamped bread for everyone, and the crowd surges. It's a soft rebellion, no pitchforks raised, no stones thrown, just people distributing hot loaves like contraband. One man even slides you a roll wrapped in a napkin. "Still warm," he says, grinning, "and free of monarchy." You learn later that bread riots or similar demonstrations weren't uncommon. From 14th century France to 18th century England, citizens revolted, not just over famine, but over the taxation and regulation of food. Some of these uprisings ended in reforms, others in arrests. One, you hear, ended with the tax rolls being dumped in a river, while the officials were forced to eat underweight barley loaves. Historians still argue whether these revolts were survival-based or simply inevitable. Someone murmurs from the shadow, You no longer question where these anonymous scholars come from. They appear with the scent of ink and always vanish by dusk. Back in your own square, the revolt is turning theatrical. A local poet stands on a crate reciting angry sonnets titled Ode to the Overcounted Onion. A pig walks by wearing a sign. I am taxed, therefore I squeal. Even Sir Reginald, cornered at last, tries diplomacy. He steps onto a barrel and clears his throat. Citizens, I propose a compromise. The crowd stills barely. He continues, for every overpaid tax this month, we shall offer a token of gratitude. A woman calls out, is that token made of bread or excuses? He hesitates, paper with ink. Possibly a commemorative drawing of your favorite taxed item. Another voice shouts, draw me a window, preferably one I don't owe for. Laughter ripples through the crowd. The tension softens. No torches are lit. No officials are dunked in cabbage carts. Instead, there is a curious collective decision to pause, to wait, to go home and count things differently tomorrow. As evening falls, a small boy wanders past you, dragging a stick. He pauses, frowns, and says, I think they taxed my shadow earlier. You pat his head. Tell them it's only half yours after sunset. He nods sagely and walks on. That night your cottage is quiet. You pull out the roll from earlier, tear off a piece, and chew thoughtfully. Unstamped, illegal, delicious. You smile, whispering to the flickering fire. Let them chase our crumbs. The village is quieter the next morning, not silent but subdued, like a pot that had been boiling too long, and finally settled to a gentle simmer. You open your window and take a deep breath of cool, possibly taxable air. A new scroll is posted on the community board. You wander over and read it, squinting in the pale sunlight. Notice voluntary tax reduction scheme. Submit creative exemptions for review. You tilt your head. Voluntary exemptions. That's new. You read on. Apparently, due to growing public feedback, the council has decided to allow residents to submit reasons why they shouldn't be taxed. Submissions will be judged on creativity, plausibility, and alignment with community values. You smirk. This is going to be interesting. The first entry comes from old Agnes, who claims that she's so elderly and wrinkled that even light avoids her window. She requests a full window levy exemption. Next, Packer bowed, but Baker argues that bread should be free because his dough has religious tendencies and routinely rises on its own. Walter the pig farmer, he says his pigs are practicing monks and therefore fall under the spiritual exemption clause, and the washerwoman's guild. They've filed a joint petition claiming that soap is technically holy water's cousin, and to tax it is to offend both Bubbles and heaven. You spend the day helping your neighbor draft a letter. She wants to avoid forwarder, curtain, court duty. recently added for homes, with excessive drapery flair. Her argument. Her curtains are less decorative, more defensive against birth. It's oddly freeing, this act of inventing your own escape route. And it turns out this form of rebellion isn't new either. In medieval record, scholars have found all sorts of loopholed exemptions. One man claimed his house didn't technically have a roof, it had an unintended ceiling platform. Another argued that he wasn't using salt, just invisible rocks of taste. Historians still argue whether these claims were satire, strategy, or sheer desperation. You hear whispered by a familiar voice. You never do catch his name. Possibly a ghost. Possibly just a very underpaid scribe. You walk past the abbey and see monks sketching diagrams of their wine cellars labeled as fermentation chapels. The local tavern now offers a drink called untaxed ale, brewed entirely in the mind, not in the vat. Even Sir Reginald has softened a little. You spot him near the town square, sipping cider, talking with a child who is trying to submit a drawing of a smiling goat as her exemption for pet-based property tax. He laughs. For the first time in weeks, he laughs. You sit beneath the big oak tree, the one with roots so long no one's dared tax it, and watch the town ease into something like calm. It's not that the taxes have stopped. Buys. Something has shifted. The people have found ways around them, sometimes clever, sometimes absurd, often both. They've turned compliance into comedy, resistance into ritual. And you've learned a thing or two. Like how bread tastes better without a stamp, how pigs make fine spiritual advisors, and how windows, despite their levies, are still worth opening every morning. As the sky darkens and the breeze cools, you make your way home. No inspectors trail you, no scrolls flutter from doors, just the creak of old boots. The soft thump of shutters. The distant, reassuring snort of a pig named Mildred. You curl into bed, your head full of shadows and silliness, and whisper, I escaped the taxman, gently. 9:44. The 29th of July, 2025 F. The fire crackles low, casting gentle shadows across the room. Outside, the wind has softened to a breeze, brushing through leaves, stirring nothing more than a sigh from the sleeping trees. You're still, now blanketed in quiet, in calm, in a world where even the taxman, clipboard in hand, has decided to take the night off. Let your body sink just a little deeper. Feel the mattress cradle your spine, the soft rhythm of your own breathing sinking with the hush of the room. No one's knocking, no scrolls to sign, no pigs to count. Just the present moment, quiet, whole, yours. Let your thoughts float like parchment caught in slow, ear-soft, spiraling. Maybe you're wandering through a candlelit village again, watching moonlight glint off window. Maybe you're listening to the soft murmur of monks in the distance, blending prayers with gentle laughter. There's no need to fix anything now. No tasks, no duties, No weights on your shoulders. Only rest. Let your thoughts dissolve like salt in warm broth. Let go of stories, names, and numbers. No taxes, no ledger. Just soft, dark silence. You did enough today, and tomorrow can wait. Sleep well, historian.